Hey YouTube, thanks for joining. Thanks for watching Boosted Impact. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to install an Innovative Motorsports ethanol sensor in a Gen 2 Raptor. There's not a lot of information online. We're going to wire it directly to our upfitter switches. We're going to be able to click on switch number 1, and we're going to see what kind of ethanol content we actually have in the tank. No guessing, no blending and hoping you got it right. If you want to run E30 or E50, you need this gauge. Innovative Motorsports, we're putting in the gauge, the sensor, it's awesome. We've got the Goose Tune E50 coming on the Raptor, and we don't want to guess. We want to know that we got E50 in the tank. Stay tuned, it's going to be good. Thanks for watching. Got my Innovative Motorsports ethanol sensor here. Working on installing it in the Ford Raptor. A little tricky. I got this little piece right here. I got this little insert from Etsy online. Pops right into the vents. Had to take a few of the little vent fins out, but it does mount nicely. I'm not crazy about the finish, but I'm gonna paint that later. Just trying to get the ethanol sensor installed on the truck so we can run E50 consistently and not have to worry about our blends. Okay, so just to catch you up on what I've done so far, installing the Innovative Motorsports ethanol sensor. This is a 2017 Ford Raptor, Gen 2. I popped my little side panel off right here. It just pops off with a flathead screwdriver. The vent itself also pops off with a flathead screwdriver. Wasn't very hard to do, just be gentle. Then this part of the vent right here, if you remove this little tab right there, you just kind of pry it out and then the vent separates. Pop your new Etsy thing in, little plastic piece, and your gauge fits right in there. From there, you can literally pop your new vent back into place and have an official gauge holder without having to make any crazy mods or without losing your grab handle. I don't like the A-pillar pods because you lose the grab handle. Gen 2 Raptor ethanol sensor gauge install, $40 Etsy piece, fits great, love it. I fished the wires through the vent down to this little side compartment. Okay, one thing I want to point out moving forward, the only two wires that I actually need are the red and the black, and of course the little plug. The brown, yellow, and white wire coming directly from the sensor itself. I tape them off all separately and then put them into a bundle together. I do not need them. The white one is for dimming, if I want it to dim when I turn my headlights on, and it doesn't dim that much, so I decided to tape them all together. I really don't need it. Okay, here we are once again. Innovative Motorsports ethanol sensor, Gen 2 Raptor, and the upfitter switches. We are going to install this ethanol sensor, hopefully, to this switch. And if I land on any of those, that's okay, as long as it's on the switches. So on the Gen 2 Raptor, on the side of the truck where you have your battery, right here would be in front of the glove box. You can see these little tails, and they're taped up right here. I have to pull these tails out of here, and you'll see there's 6 of them because we have 6 upfitter switches. These are all pre-wired into this fuse box. There's already a fuse in there. So all I have to do is pick the right one of these, hopefully for the right switch, and hook my power to it. And then I'm going to take my ground wire and hook it directly to the battery on the negative side, which would be the ground. So I did have to purchase a few extra items from the auto parts store, and here they are. I needed a ground wire to reach from the sensor to my battery, so I got some 18 gauge black, and I needed a power wire to go from the sensor to my upfitter switch, so I got 18 gauge red. with that. So I got butt connectors for my wire, and then I also got a spade connector for the ground wire. So this I will use for the power wire to connect this red wire to the sensor, and this will get installed on the end of this black wire to go to the battery. So I've got my spade connector connected to my black wire, which will be my ground. I used a lighter to shrink the heat wrap on it. That way it's nice and watertight. And I used the crimpers to crimp it tight so that it can't be pulled. Cut about 10 feet of wire. That way I have plenty to reach my battery and the sensor, and I'll trim that later. So I have to get my power wire, my ground wire, and my sensor wire through the firewall. I am gonna go right there. Sorry for the bad angle and the shaking. Right here, I'm gonna try to pop a hole in this and see if I can fish a wire through there. So we had to fish our wire through the firewall. Here's my fishing wire. Literally just means I'm using it to get through the hole. And if you can see right there, I cut a slit in that rubber grommet. So I'm going to use this wire to hook our wires and our sensor wire through and pull it through. Stay tuned. Okay, so right here we have the wire we fished through my firewall. I have my sensor wire, which is right here with the plug on it. And then I have the power and the ground wire, which I've rigged up. What I'm gonna do is take some electrical tape. I wrapped a loop around all these, and I'm gonna tape them all together to make sure that they don't come off while I'm fishing them through. And this will also create less resistance as I'm coming through the firewall, so they won't get hung up. Okay, so here's my sensor wire. Here is my ground and my power wire. The ground is the one I put the little tab on for the battery. Here's my red power wire that'll go to the upfitter switch wire. And I got them pulled through this grommet right here without having to drill any holes in the firewall. The wires I just fished through are coming through the top of that grommet. I did not have to drill any holes in my firewall. So we got our wires fished through. There's my ground, there's my hot. This is our sensor wires. There's my hot, there's my ground. This is our plug. And here is the plug that we fished through the wall. This is gonna eventually get plugged into that. What we need to do is we're gonna come up through the vent, through this side of the vent right here, and bring our wires together. And this is where we're gonna need to connect our ground to our ground and our hot to our hot. So the first thing we're gonna do is get my hot wires. I'm gonna strip the hot wire, twist it up. Don't need quite that much length, so we're gonna cut it off just a touch. This one's coming directly from the sensor. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna slide on one of these heat shrinks. We're gonna slide it up the wire. And then we're gonna slide this into our butt connector. We're gonna slide both of these, one in one side and one into the other. And then we're gonna crimp with our crimper. I'm gonna check that they're both tight, and they are. We're going to slide our heat shrink wrap right over it. I'm going to heat that shrink wrap just enough to seal up, like that. So there, our wires are nice and tight, connected together. Now we're going to do our ground. So we have our ground and our hot connected here inside the truck. Remember, these are the wires we don't need, so we take those off. So we have our sensor plug. We're going to go ahead and plug that right in. Now, so here we have our slack that's left after we made our connections, and we're going to pull our slack back through that grommet. Okay, we got our slack pulled back through. As you can see, everything's nice and tight and uniform. We did not have to drill any holes in the firewall, so we have not really compromised the integrity of the truck. We did have to cut one little slit in a rubber grommet, but that's okay. Okay, we've got our sensor hooked up electrically inside the truck. Now we have our sensor plug. Of course, we fished it through the firewall. I have started to route some of this here. I used a zip tie. My power and my ground are coming over this way. I'm going to zip tie those off nicely. And of course, the red wire is going to get hooked to these tails I mentioned earlier. That's my upfitter switches. And the black wire is going to get attached to my ground post on the battery, which is the negative side of the battery, the black side. So based on what I've read, this solid green wire with the blue stripe is upfitter switch 1, which should be wired to a 15 amp fuse. So I'm going to connect my red power wire to this green upfitter switch wire, and my ground will go to the ground post on the battery. So I used a butt connector and connected my red power wire from my sensor to the green solid wire to my upfitter switches. Hopefully this works out. Okay, and now you can see here's my ground wire connected to my battery. Of course, I don't have it all in place. I plan on zip tying things up, making it cleaner. There is my connector to my upfitter switch. Okay, here we go, guys. I'm gonna crank the truck up. Here's the gauge. And upfitter switch number 1. We're about to flip it, and when I do, let's see if the gauge comes on. We have action. Awesome. So I've officially connected to the number 1 upfitter switch on the Gen 2 Raptor, an ethanol sensor. So this was just the electrical portion. I still have to do the fuel. Stay tuned, and I will connect the fuel. What I gotta do is I gotta take the cover off of the engine. There's 2 little bolts that hold it on. A 10mm socket with an extension. So you'll just take these little bolts right here off, and your cover will pop right off. So like I said, the 2 bolts, 10mm with the extension, took those off, and the cover comes right off. And what we are looking for is our high pressure fuel pump, which should be this right here. If I know what I'm looking at, that looks like the fuel pump. I see a fuel line running what looks to be to the fuel rail. This looks to be the low side. I believe that's where I'm going to connect. Okay, so what we have here, this is our sensor. That came with the Innovative Motorsports gauge. Right here, I bought 2 Dorman fuel connections. They were easily available whenever I looked for the sensor online. I got it on Amazon, and they recommended me to buy these. From there, I bought approximately 1 foot of 3/8 fuel hose. And then you'll see I've got C-type fuel connectors. Don't use the worm drives. They will chew the fuel line up and you will have a problem. This is going to plug in to the low side of our fuel pump. This is going to loop the gap between the two. Okay, we are back. It is time to officially install the sensor portion of the Innovative Motorsports Ethenol sensor. I have to tap into the fuel line. So far, what I've had to do, I have removed the negative battery cable. That way there's no power going to the entire truck. Also, I had to depressurize the fuel system. There is no information online about how to do information online about how to actually depressurize the fuel system on a 2017 Ford Raptor. They're all telling you information that's incorrect because it tells you about F-150s and to depressurize the fuel system on a 2017 Ford Raptor or any Gen 2 Raptor, you're gonna need a cob access port or something like it. Unless you can find your fuel pump fuse, which I cannot. So one thing that I noticed was I had to take off this cover in order to access everything to tap into the fuel system. It was super dirty. So I literally just took some Mother's VLR, vinyl and leather and rubber protectant, and cleaned that bad boy up. And it looks so much better. This right here will actually latch around the fuel hose and allow me to disconnect the existing fuel line so that we can tap into it. Stay tuned. Okay, so this is the little tool that I'm going to be having to use, and it goes just like this over the fuel line, like that. And I'm going to slide this down into this connection. I'm gonna have to push into the fuel line and disconnect it. Okay, so there's my fuel line that I'm gonna disconnect. I have tucked a bunch of rags under it to catch any fuel that spills out. Okay, I had a little bit of gas spray out on me, but I made my connection right here into my gas tube and right here into my fuel pump. Everything feels secure. Everything feels secure. I still have to check for leaks. So I hope and pray that there's no leaks. Okay, so I've got my wife gonna start the vehicle up. We are checking for leaks. Go ahead. Everything looks good. Okay, cover's going back on. Zip tie in my mouth. We got it all in there. Here's my wire coming up from my sensor. Here's my ground and my power, which I'm gonna zip tie up out of the way. You can see I've kind of got to bundle them up over here and tighten them up, but I got it all under the cover. No leaks. So far, so good. All right, YouTube, we are back. We've got our Innovative Motorsports Ethenol sensor installed, and we are connected to upfitter switch number 1. I'm gonna go ahead and kick the switch on, and I have blended my fuel to 50% ethanol, give or take a percent or two. And there we are. We're showing 51.2%. Now, I've actually already made some passes at the dragway to test the new tune from Goose Tune. But just to finish up my ethanol sensor install video, everything is working correctly, and it is absolutely impressive. If you haven't heard of Goose Tune, you got to look him up. He's got the best E50 tune for the Raptor you can get. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.